When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as strategies to slow or stop those fights. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today I'm joined by Jon Skillman, creator and host of the Sober Dad podcast and A Sober Human. So happy to have you on, Jon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Daryl.
Great to have you be here. You know, I know you and I have talked a lot in the past, and actually I was happy to have been on your podcast a while back. And what I like to do is ask my guests how they got to where they are today. You know, there's always a good story that drives a person to either change or help others or move in a different direction or start a podcast.
Yeah.
What's that story for you?
Well, I mean, the short version is like growing up, I didn't, I read the Gabor Mate book, The I'm a Hungry Ghost, and he talks about how there's like trauma in like early life and all this stuff that leads to addiction, in his opinion. And I mean, I've racked my brain and thinking back, I don't have any childhood trauma that I can think of, but what I did have that I believe led me to the point where I was at over a year ago was drinking was very normalized in my family. Every family gathering, whether it be camping or a holiday or just the weekends, there was alcohol all the time everywhere. And it was, what I was used to. And I mean, I think my first drink was at a wedding, and it was an accident. My cousin was getting married, and one of my uncles was the bartender, and he was partaking way too much of his own. And I went to get some apple cider and, sparkling cider, and he gave me a flute of champagne. So I sipped on it and I was like, oh, this is super gross. But then I kept sipping it out of curiosity, and I was sharing it with my brother. I think I was 8. And then we went back and we're like, hey, more apple cider, please, wink. And then get another flute of champagne. And so, and I was a little sick after that. And I think I didn't touch it again until well into high school. And then just the usual high school get-togethers, parties on the weekends and stuff. And it was never really an issue. And it was, aside from my brother buying alcohol for me because I'd beg him to, my older brother, like when I was, 19, 20, I just really didn't drink that much. But even then, sometimes I would drink to the point of making myself very ill, and then I wouldn't drink again for a while. And then it wasn't until I was 21 and I could buy it myself where then I was able to partake in these, the family traditions. We'd go camping and I would, be completely wasted by like 1 or 2 in the afternoon and just drinking all day. Couldn't wait to drink because that's what everybody did, and it was fun. And but I still had kind of kept it to the weekends or special occasions like camping and vacations. And then it got to I met my wife in 2012, and she was actually going to be leaving the country to go to grad school, and I wanted to go with her. So I was like, hey, we should just get married. So 6 months after meeting her, we got married, and that was in December of 2012, and we moved to the Caribbean. And then suddenly I'm in a place I don't know anybody except for my wife. We have a roommate that I didn't even know. They were classmates and like, hey, I need a place to stay. So do I. So we were staying at this place, and I was working on my computer for a company back in the States. So then I had all this time and nobody to hang out with. And alcohol in the Caribbean is very, very inexpensive and very easy to get. It's everywhere. So I would routinely just drink during the day while I was working on my computer, and then my wife would get home and then we'd go do our stuff. And it was just, that's when it became like almost an everyday thing. And then fast forward to coming back to the States where she finished her schooling, and I was working a full-time job for a city here in Oregon, and I would still drink, but not too much. But when I was home, I would drink. Like any day that I had a day off, I was drinking pretty much all day. And then my wife got pregnant, and she had graduated and immediately got a much higher paying job than me. So then I quit my city job and I still worked from home a little bit and had the baby. And like I would drink on occasion, but then I would find myself like about at noon or so, I'd crack open like a beer or two. And then that kind of just progressed. And as we had more kids, then I quit my other job. So then it was just my job was stay at home dad. And I had, I would drink on and off through the week, but it wasn't every day. And then I would say about the time our third kid came, it was pretty much any time that my wife was at work, I was drinking. She'd go to work and then I would load the kids up in the car. We'd go to the gym. And then on the way home from the gym, it was just routine at that point. I'd pull into the gas station, get, whatever the 12 pack or, depending on what it was that day, what the flavor of the day was that I wanted to drink. It was either IPAs or near the end, it was literally just those seltzer beers. Cause I was still conscious of calories and everything, hence going to the gym. I think if I didn't go to the gym all the time and wasn't only drinking alcohol and not eating anything, I probably would have been a lot heavier. But I was so conscious about, like what I'm putting into my body, so to speak, as far as calories go, that I would omit food so I could drink. So then, when I got sober, I lost a whole bunch of weight immediately because I wasn't used to eating. But yeah, so then it just progressed into that. And I mean, for me, one of my big triggers at the time was politics. So there was like the 2020 election, COVID, all that stuff happened. And that just fueled it more for me. And my wife was, one of the essential workers, whatever you want to call it. So she was still going to work during COVID. So I still had a lot of that time where I could hide my drinks. And this whole time, by the way, my wife was unaware of how much I was drinking. She would come home, I'd be acting weird, and I would just blame it on anything but alcohol. Like, oh, I'm really tired today, or I didn't sleep well, or blah, blah, blah. And so the whole time I'm like, gaslighting her and lying to her about what I've been doing. And then it got to the point where she caught me once, basically passed out, and I had alcohol near me, so she knew it. So then that was when she drew the line, like, okay, no more alcohol in our house. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever, fine. And then I got like a month, and then I just started doing it again and again and again, always telling myself I was going to quit. And then fast forward to a little over a year ago, my fourth child was born, and somehow by the grace of God or luck or whatever, I was always sober when my wife went into labor. Like I wasn't intoxicated when she went into labor. So I was able to, get through all that. But she had a minor complication and had to go back to the hospital. And I was able to get away for a few hours. And I, on the way home, picked up alcohol, drank at home, drank on the way back to the hospital, and showed up at the hospital drunk. And that was, yeah. And she, she knew but didn't make a thing out of it because she was in the hospital. And then, after that, I drank one more time, and it was actually on Valentine's Day of 2023, or the day before Valentine's Day, actually. But she was, she was at work, and I had been drinking all day. And then she sent me out to go pick up dinner, and I went out and stopped and got more alcohol, came home, and she met me out in the garage, and I had it sitting in the car in a container because I had poured it into a thing. And for whatever reason, I didn't try to hide it. She walked in, grabbed the container, smelled it. And then of course, then I was trying to be like, oh, that's not, and it was like an IPA, like a really strong IPA. And I was trying to tell her like, oh, that's tea, or, whatever, like just trying to lie my way out of it. But the difference that time was like, usually she would get upset, she'd get mad, she'd yell, she'd cry or do anything. She just like, there was no emotion there. She was just like, it just seemed like she was detached. She was done. And that scared the hell out of me, to where I didn't drink again for 2 weeks. And then I was having a really bad day and I wanted to drink really bad. And now she's on maternity leave, so she wasn't going to work. So if I wanted to, I would have had to sneak out like I was trying to do then. And it was 2 weeks into this sobriety, and she just sat on the couch and was like, hey, are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm not. And then I just told her, the 5 years worth of all the stuff all the lies I'd done, all the drinking I've been doing, all the hiding it. And, and that was one of the worst days of my life, but also now one of the best days of my life, because she was very close to like taking the kids and leaving or kicking me out that day. And then she had some time to think about it. and we, went through it. But like, I felt so good after that, and she felt so bad because she had I just told her that I'd been lying to her for 5 years. And like, but almost at the time, it was like half of our married life, I had been lying about alcohol and hiding it and doing all these things and putting our kids in danger, putting myself in danger. And it was just, yeah, it was the kick I needed, though, because I'd tried to quit so many other times. Like, she would catch me and I'd quit for like a week or two. I think the most I got was like 2 months. And then I would always go right back into it because I wasn't changing any of my habits. So yeah, what led up to it was finally just letting it go and sharing it with somebody else. Because the common theme through this whole thing, I had no one to talk to. I felt isolated at home. I didn't go out and talk to anybody. It was just me and the kids. And then she would come home, and at that point I'd already be drunk or, you know, angry about politics or something else that I saw on the internet. And it was very isolating. So when I finally let somebody else in, the compulsion to drink just disappeared. And, that was over a year ago now.
Yeah, congratulations on it. I remember when you passed a year, and now it's been what, 2.5 months past the year anniversary, which is great. I was so happy for you. Am so happy for you.
Thank you.
And we see these stories, and everybody's story is a little bit different, but it's amazing how that little shred of honesty, when we're able to take a look, right? We're able to just peek behind the curtain a little bit at ourselves. That's generally what it takes, and at least what I've seen over the years, to be able to at least consider change, right? We start to see ourselves, and then, when we get honest with other people, that's a gigantic weight off our shoulders. But I went through the same thing, and I was younger, but I went through the same thing with my parents, when I had to finally get honest with them about my stuff. And, it was one of the hardest things in the world, was watching my mom fall apart when she, finally got a taste of some of the crap that I was into, so, but like you said, worst day of my life, but also in many ways the best day, because that was the turning point, right? That was where it changed.
Yeah, and it was the accountability is what really, I think, ultimately did it for me, because I wasn't accountable to anybody every other time, because my method for trying to quit drinking would be, okay, so if I just quit drinking right now, I'll never have to own up to all the times my wife came home and was like, "What's wrong with you?" or all the fights and the mean things that I said, which I would never have said sober. I didn't even feel that way. And like, I would say something and then wake up the next day feeling so awful, because that's like, I would just say things to win arguments and not even mean what I said. And, so my hope was like, oh, I'll just get sober and never have to confront all those things that I did. And just the guilt and shame of that often was enough to drive me back into drinking, because at the end I was just drinking to not feel like a piece of crap and not feel like garbage. And it wasn't even about like getting drunk anymore. It was just like, I don't want to deal with all these feelings. So, and it was like an out of body experience. I would wake up fully intent on not drinking. And then well before noon, I would just be on autopilot going in to go get alcohol and then come home and drink it again. And yeah, because there was no accountability there. So as soon as I brought my wife in and then brought other family members in, I think the second person I told was my brother-in-law, who is he's been in AA for at the time it was like 17 years, and he'd been sober that whole time. So I called him like, "Hey, what do I got to do?" So then I started going to meetings and started getting involved in AA and just building that accountability circle to the point now where, and then I found Twitter and the Recovery Posse, and then made the podcast, and all these things were just different ways of me being accountable to as many people as possible. And so it's just more motivation for me, because I'm not only would I be letting myself down, my family down, but then I'd be letting down, all these other people that now know my situation, know my story. So a very common theme in my podcast is accountability. And that also relates into parenting with me. Like, I try to make sure that my kids are accountable for all their actions, and, responsible for everything that I expect them to do, and I show them that, this here's my job, and I'm responsible for this. So if you see me not doing that thing, then let me know. Like, if I'm not giving you what you need to tell me, kind of thing. And that's been, you know, that's something that recovery has given me, is just an awareness of accountability and like what I should be doing. And if I'm not doing the right things, I find myself slipping back into old habits, like like looking up things on the internet, like politics wise, and things like looking for things to be mad about. That was something that was very into when I was drinking. And then there's been times, even in the sobriety, where sometimes like I'll be feeling sorry for myself, and then I'll notice myself starting to take on some of those old behaviors again. And then that's when I need to be like, okay, snap back out of it, talk to somebody about it, like my wife or my dad, who, he got sober 3 months after me, and he's coming up on a year sober now. Next month he'll be a year sober. And so now I've got this circle of people I can talk to if I'm not doing right. And one of my guests before said, and it's kind of stuck with me, he's like, if you don't feel good, just say you don't feel good. Like, tell somebody. And that was something that was like, oh, that's a great idea, because I spent all these years just keeping it all inside and not telling anybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that's great, man. I love to hear that, because my sobriety, it's been a bit since I was 19 years old, and I've gone through all that stuff. Like you practice certain things, you stop practicing. You do this, you stop doing it. You do that, you stop doing it. And what I learned is, why don't I just freaking do it? Because if I don't do it, I'm going to get pushed back onto the road where I need to do it anyway. That's the really cool thing about sobriety. And I think accountability, but accountability to ourselves, right? Like accountability to me, where I make this stuff happen because I know that makes me better in the world, and when I say world, I mean, I start off with the me world, and then, the family world, and then the community world, and the greater world. I plug myself in as somebody who's much more useful than I used to be, and that's just a cool feeling. You mentioned politics a couple of times, and it's funny because I grew up in a family where I wouldn't know. I didn't know politics if it hit me in the face. Like I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. Didn't care. Nobody ever said anything about it. Now, I know my parents went and voted, but it wasn't something we talked about. It just never, ever came up. And several years ago, and I think it was, all the stuff that went on with COVID and this and that, I started to pay attention, and I started to pay attention, and then I started to get some emotion around it.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened for, a couple of years, and to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm just not doing this anymore. I'm out. I'm not going to bother myself, and I'm not going to disrupt my serenity with that. For me, that's just a fight that I would wage, but I'm not fighting with anyone. The only person I'm fighting with is myself. The only person I'm flipping out about or in or with is me, because I'm not, my anger and my, how I feel about that doesn't matter, in the grand scheme of what actually happens in this world. Now, obviously we have obligations being, in the United States, and what a beautiful country we have. But, and I firmly believe that, but for me to get emotional about those things, it's not worth my serenity. So I hear exactly what you're saying about that. So what other, I guess, what's your greatest sort of fight now? You've been sober for a bit, and what's kind of the most difficult fight for you now?
I would say with me, I am very critical of myself, probably because a big part of that was all the things that I had done in the past. So getting over all the bad, all the wrongs that I did when it came to not being a good parent, not being a good spouse, to where now I think the biggest fight I have now is just a kind of like I have this podcast where I talk about parenting and sobriety and all this stuff, and give all these, all these pointers and things about parenting that I've learned. And then for me, the hardest part is implementing that myself sometimes, to where like I know that like this is how I should address a certain situation, like when one of my kids is throwing a fit. And sometimes, and I think it's a bit of a like imposter syndrome comes into play, because I do these podcasts, I talk about this stuff, and I do the things that I recommend. Nothing I've ever recommended on the show is something that I haven't already tried myself and do regularly. But then sometimes, I got 4 young kids, one on the way, and it just eventually you just kind of run out of like F's to give, for lack of a better phrase. And then that's when, I might snap at one of the kids and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, I'll call him a brat, or or just like, leave me alone. I've said that before. And then I'm just like, probably shouldn't be saying these things. And a big part of that too is that, like, living here in the Pacific Northwest, it rains a lot in the wintertime. And I noticed that in the winter months, the kids go a little stir crazy, and then I do as well. And then that's when I find myself kind of falling back on like being bored. And then I will, stop. I won't be practicing what I preach as much. Like, in the summertime, it's great. Like even this time of year, spring's here, I get the kids outside, do all this stuff, and that kind of recharges my batteries. But I guess my biggest struggle to summarize it is just that I there's times where I don't do the necessary steps I need to maintain my serenity, like you were speaking about, to where like I have that presence of mind to where when one of the kids comes at me with some crap and I'm just like leave me alone, go away, or snap at them, because I've like the two will be bickering, and then I'll just say something to both of them, and be like, you guys need to stop and do this and this and this, and then I'll say something mean that I shouldn't have. And then I'm pretty quick to apologize now, which is another, it's something I got out of AA basically, is I think what is it, 8, I believe, where you essentially, or you, I call it apologizing early and often. I can't remember the exact verbiage of it, but yeah, basically it just means like when you're wrong, promptly admitted it, that one. Yeah. So I do that now. But I would say that, a big part is that I get myself overwhelmed and I lose my serenity temporarily, and I either say something mean, say something bad, or just kind of shut down and go back into some old habits like scrolling on my phone or something, which I definitely try to avoid doing.
Yeah, the entirety of, and we talked about this a little bit this morning on the space, right? Like just it's best to have a full cup to be able to pour out of, and that can be an elusive thing. It's not easy to have that. You don't maintain that serenity all the time. And I think one of the fights for me early on was, I would tell myself, well, I shouldn't be thinking that, or I'd think a thought and then I'd say, oh, I can't think that, or I'd feel a feeling, oh, I can't feel that, or like I know you read my book, but the ass kicking machine, right?
Yes, that thing is turned on in my house several times a day sometimes.
Yeah, that's a hard thing, but and I get it. I mean, that's why I chuckle, because I understand, I understand. I spent a long time with the ass kicking machine clicked on, and it was rare when it was off. The off part was rare. Now it's gone. Now it's thrown, away. So there's things that just morph and change and grow and whatever over time. And that's one of the things. The ass kicking machine goes off and then it goes away. And then you look back a few years later, you're like, what happened to that thing? Like it just sort of happens. And it's a pretty cool thing. But one of the things I was thinking about when you were speaking was the should monster, right? We should all over ourselves. And, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, just having kids in general, especially young kids, I mean, they themselves are little ass kicking machines. They'll like, I've gotten to the point now where I'm pretty okay with what has happened in the past, and I'm, as far as the drinking goes and all that stuff goes. And now, yeah, my internal struggles now are, am I being a good parent right now? Why did I say that to my kid? Or why didn't I do this thing for my kid? Or why didn't I do this thing for my wife? So it's a different kind of ass kicking machine, but it's, it's a whole new thing. And I think that's just part of, like my mantra before, when I was drinking, but I also wanted to be a good parent, was like, well, at least I care, but I wasn't doing anything to change that.
Mm.
And that's the biggest thing now, is that I'm willing to change. I want to change, and I'm, taking in the necessary information and applying it. And I mean, like you said, in early recovery, some of the you start doing all these different things. Like I tried everything in early recovery too, like journaling and gratitude, all this stuff. And some things I kept, and some things I didn't really get much out of and didn't do. And same thing with the parenting thing. Like I'll read a book on parenting, or listen to a different podcast. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool, let's try that. And I try that, and it's a miserable failure because the kids want nothing to do with it, or I just follow the habit of it. And it's just like, yeah, it's just trying to find what works in your situation. Now, the family unit, just like in sobriety, I mean, some things are going to work for some people that aren't going to work for others, and vice versa. And I've probably tried and failed just as many times at different parenting techniques than I have at trying to quit drinking back in the day. And yeah, kids will make you very hyper aware of your inadequacies. And I think that's, like I was alluding to before, one of the things I struggle with is that, like, imposter syndrome and feeling inadequate at times. And yeah, it's just, in the end, just like in your book, can't control the nouns. I mean, yes, kids are little nouns and you're supposed to be able to control them, but honestly, you could be the best parent in the world and your kids are still going to let you down. You're going to let your kids down. And it's just learning to be okay with that is a big part of parenting and in sobriety. Just learning to be okay with the fact that you can't control everything.
100%. I mean, there is nothing more crucial for me in life, and sobriety and recoveries. It really is, just becomes life, and we've been given an opportunity because of our faults to catapult into a wonderful life, because we have to pay attention and we have to get better at the whole thing. It's a fascinating way to look at it, because you think sort of early on, like, oh man, I got to do all this stuff and I got to do these steps and I got to this and that, but it becomes the greatest blessing ever, because we get to change, and we are allowed to get to a point where that fighting stops inside of us, and it the seas become pretty calm, and it's just a matter of time. And I'll just say this, you're trying is the key. Trying is the absolute key, and the willingness to do things differently and do things, that I'm conscious of what I'm doing, is absolutely the key. And as long as we're trying, I had somebody tell me a long time ago, Daryl, if you're not confused, you're not working the program. And I was confused for a long time. I was like, what the hell's going on? But it meant I was changing. And that's just a really cool thing to sort of keep an eye on. It's not the end of the world to feel overwhelmed or confused or whatever. That's just part of the gig.
Yeah. Sorry if you heard my kids. I muted for a second, but yeah, they're having a good time out there with grandma, and apparently the dog. I can hear the dog barking too. But yeah, just real quick on that, I just wanted to say that, kind of to the theme of your book, when you stop fighting. I mean, I fought for so long to keep my secrets and not let them out and not share them. And then I fought for so long, like, no, this is how I have to be a parent. The kids have to do things this way. They have to respect me. They have to do what I say all the time because I said so, kind of thing. And that's how I was going about both, trying to quit drinking and being a parent. And then, yeah, there's a definite release, like I said, when I told my wife, I just stopped fighting it and stopped trying to keep that secret and just told her what was going on. And same thing now with my kids. I mean, when I just like accept the fact that things are going to happen, and I don't try to like fight with them and argue with them, especially like, I don't know how many people out there have tried arguing with toddlers and 6-year-olds and stuff, but I mean, I literally give this advice to my 6 and 4-year-old when they're arguing with their little brother who's 2. I'm like, he's 2. You're not going to win that argument. You could be 100% right. He doesn't care. And it's just avoiding conflict, even especially internal conflict, is the only way to really find any sense of peace and serenity. And I don't know exactly when it happened, as far as like the guilt and the shame and all that stuff that I had for so long, even in sobriety. Like even at 6 months sober, I still felt like a terrible person at times when I started reminiscing about all the things that I had done. And even now, yeah, when I think about it, it sucks. But I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but I just wanted to say for, people out there that are new in recovery or in early recovery, that eventually it does happen. Like, I don't even know the exact point, but there just became a point where, like, I think in casually, like my wife said something about before, and she said, oh, well, you were probably drunk at the time or whatever. And that used to sting and hurt really bad because I was still very ashamed of it. But like more recently, she said that, and I was just like, yeah, I was. And it was a different feeling. Like, so what, I don't know when or how or where, but eventually it does get better. It stops hurting so much. And all you can do is just keep pressing forward and just stop trying to, you can't change what happens. So you might as well just keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's amazing how much power there is, and you alluded to it, but how much power there is in surrender. Like, hey, I'm not going to change this. I'm not going to change anything outside my skin. So, it doesn't mean I stop trying. I certainly keep trying, but surrendering to, sometimes just what is incredibly powerful. And as far as change goes, and I'll a couple of things here. As far as change goes, there's so many things in my life over the years of being sober where something will change for me and I might not think about it for 10 years. And I'll be like, oh my God, I don't do that anymore. Or I don't think that anymore. Or that doesn't affect me anymore. And it's an amazing thing because you're changing, but it's not conscious. You're doing the work, but the change isn't conscious. And that's just a really powerful, humbling feeling, honestly.
Yeah. And for me, that's a sign of, getting better, is that, you're healing mentally, physically, all these things are happening to you, especially early on in recovery. And then the older scars seem to heal over and you don't even realize it when it happens. It's just, you're just at peace suddenly. And it's a great feeling just to not have to worry about that and not have to like relive those moments. And like we were saying before we started recording, you were talking about how like wine coolers hadn't even come out yet when you got sober. And I was telling you about, my old favorite drink came out with an alcoholic version, and I was at the store and I saw that, and there was like a little tinge of like jealousy and like FOMO, like fear of missing out. And, and it's okay to have those feelings too. It's for anybody, like I've been sober for, 14 months now. And yeah, I still get those feelings. And I'm sure you've at one point or another you've been sober almost 40 years. I'm sure you've had every now and then like a little bit of fear of missing out, or like, oh, I wonder what that would be like kind of thing. And, it's okay to have those thoughts and then just to move past them. And if anything, that's just shows that you're still human and you haven't that was a part of you. It was something that was important to us, regardless of how bad it was for us. Addiction, whether it be drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, like that was a part of who we were. And so it's okay to reminisce sometimes. The only difference is you can reminisce, but don't turn it into like fond memories or things like that. Just, I guess my long-winded thing here, but yeah, just, it's okay to have those thoughts, but just address those thoughts and then move on from them, and don't feel bad for having them, is what I was, I guess, trying to get to.
Right, right. And so many times, and we start to recognize where we fight ourselves, and a lot of times that's the fight. I have that thought, or I entertain something for a second, and then I'm just no, 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 I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. And that internal battle. And
Yeah.
there's a word that, one of my favorite words in the English language, is allow. I have to
Mhm.
just allow things to happen. I have to allow life to happen, and I don't have to be. And this may sound ridiculous, because I am a pretty emotional guy. Most people who know me or understand that. But if you look at me or you talk to me for 5 minutes, you're like, oh, he's kind of scary. But I am. I'm a very emotional guy, and it's because I can see things, or I can feel things, but it doesn't have to ruin my day. It doesn't have to change anything about me or my life or my day, or anything like that. It just goes through. It just flows through. And that's one of the beautiful things that just starts to really happen over time. You had mentioned something about feeling bad, and something pinged in me. It's just a short little story, but I was out on our deck, I don't know, probably 3 months ago, and I'm just looking at the sky and waiting for shooting stars and that sort of thing. And I started. Both of my parents my mom passed away in 2001, my dad passed away in 2013, so they've been dead for a while. But I was out there and I was thinking about them, and I was kind of communing with them and just talking to them, and that sort of thing. And it
Yeah.
was a beautiful thing. And the but I started to get teary, and I started to get sad, and I even said to my mom, I said, I'm sorry if I hurt you. And so almost 40 years later, and it doesn't stop me. It doesn't ruin my day. It was actually a beautiful moment,
Yeah.
because they were with me at that time, and it was a really cool thing. So, that stuff doesn't have to just go away, but it doesn't have to be something that clobbers us over the head or over the heart,
Yeah, yeah. It can heal and get better without, like I said, it's a part of you. Like that happened, and it's not gonna be gone forever. But the bad feelings will subside, can subside, and then every now and then they'll creep back up again. But that's just part of the progress. And I honestly don't think I would ever want to completely like forget like all that, because there was a lot of good times in there too. And a lot of my some of my best memories are during the with my family, or during times where I was in my addictions, not necessarily when I was actively drinking, but like on one of the rare days where I wasn't drinking, we would do something really cool. Or like my kids taking their first steps, things like that. That's a lot of that stuff is there. And if you forget that, then you'd have to forget it all. And so I think a big part of one of the cool things about recovery is that you can, once you get to a point where it doesn't hurt to look back, you can look back fondly on things that happened then. But before, like, even old photos and stuff, my wife would be flipping through her phone and see old photos, and I wouldn't want to look at them with her, because I knew that in some of those photos that I was drunk, even if she didn't know I was.
Mhm.
And now I can look back and not focus so much on the photo itself, but of the thing that was happening at the time, the things that we did together. And yeah, it's just a much better life. And I feel very fortunate that my wife gave me one more chance, a direct quote. But yeah, I'm fortunate that I got one more chance at it, and that I'm now able to have all these moments with my kids and talk to great people like you, and
Thank you.
just grow in my sobriety, and then in my just general knowledge. I think that like we've people have said it on Recovery Pause and stuff. AA and the 12 steps are, they're not for everyone that's in recovery, but I do think that everyone would benefit from doing 12 steps. Just like the inventory alone, things like that. It was so beneficial to me to realize like what in my life was causing me grief, and what I could do without on that list, and then shed those things. And so I would in my podcast, I recommend in my show notes and everything, I have links to all these different refuge recovery, NA, AA, all that stuff, Al-Anon, and there's just so many things. So I would, just like we said earlier, just try everything if you need to, like if you're early in recovery. And even if you've been recovered for a long time, if you've never stepped foot in an AA meeting and you feel like you need a change or something, try it. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is you don't like it. The best thing that could happen is you found a new way to stay sober.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's my wife says it all the time. We were talking a little bit about this earlier, but she's amazed at the sober community and some of the things that she has heard over time, and some of the things that, the 12 steps and the things that can be practiced in sobriety. And, it's a guide for living. I mean, it's a guide for living a successful life. And that's all it is. It's not anything terribly magical, or, you can find the same principles in Buddhism, in Taoism, in Confucianism, in legalism, and, some of the Christian religions. I mean, it's principle oriented, and that's really what it is. I like to look at it like it's taking out the garbage and changing myself from the inside out. And it's really as simple as that. But, some people need something else. And if I'm going to direct somebody to a way to get sober or clean, I would direct them to the 12 steps. That's been my experience. And I don't know of any other methods to do it. So if there was one thing, I know you've talked a little bit about it, but if you were going to give advice to somebody just embarking on the journey, and sobriety, we'll just call it sobriety, but somebody looking to get happier, get better, feel better, embark upon a different way of life, what would your one piece of advice be?
No, see, that's an easy one for me, because it's exactly what I did after fighting for so long and losing every battle. Pick someone that is important to you, whose opinion of you care about. So, like for me, it was my wife, but for you, it could be a best friend, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, someone that is important enough to you that you care that they care about you and that their opinion of you is important. And then tell them what you're going through and to ask for help if you need it. Like that accountability and that freeing feeling of having someone else know what you're going through was what did it for me. After trying to quit for literally like 5 years, I would wake up almost every morning swearing I would never drink again, and then drink that day or like the next day. So and in the 12 steps, this is step 5. And step 5, you're supposed to tell somebody the exact nature of your wrongs. And I didn't even know what step 5 was when I did this, but it, for lack of a better word, it cured me like immediately. Like I felt so much better, and I was on the verge of leaving the house to go drink that day, because I was out of patience. I was out of options. I was tired of fighting, and just the act of telling somebody else what you're going through, and then them saying, okay, like, how can I help? So pick somebody that is important to you and that you're important to them, and tell them what you're going through, and ask for help if you need it.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Great advice. Well, Jon, thank you. I so much appreciate you being on, and you've got a great podcast, the Sober Dad podcast, which I love the name, and loved being on your podcast. But how do we find you?
Oh, it's at Sober Dad Podcast on all podcasting platforms. Then on YouTube and Rumble for video podcasting, it's the Sober Dad Podcast. If you want to reach out to either come on the show or, ask questions, whatever, just say, hey, you can reach me at soberdadpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also find me on X at SoberDadPod.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate, you sharing and your honesty and forthrightness, and honestly, you're, you could tell you love being sober, and you could tell you love being a dad, and you love your family, and it's just a wonderful thing to see. So thank you, Jon.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great feeling.
And thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.